Thank you for joining us today. It's going to be a Q&A. We're going to harvest some honey, but we're also going to do a hive split. So tune in, we'll have some tips and tricks for you if you want to split your hive, which is a great thing to do in the springtime because it relieves the congestion down here, which is the primary trigger for swarming. And the idea is you keep your bees in the box, keep them nice and productive, and doing your spring management helps you keep your bees there and limits that primary swarming trigger of when it gets too crowded, half of the bees take off, and that's their natural division. But if we relieve the congestion, we harvest honey in the springtime and we take our splits or find another way to make more room, then that'll limit the chances of your hive swarming. So tune in, let us know if you can hear us okay, give us the thumbs up if you can hear us, and hopefully all the channels are working. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below and Trace will read those out and we'll answer them as we go. So today I'm just going to have a look at this beautiful hive Isabella painted and see what the bees are doing. Look at that, I can see capped honey. Give us a thumbs up if you can see capped honey in the window here. In fact, that might be a great frame to harvest. If you look here, you can see that the frames are almost full. They're filling up beautifully, and look at that, isn't it just gorgeous to see the honey coming in and filling the cells. And if you look closely, you can actually watch the bees depositing nectar with their tongue and going through their amazing, there's a little droplet there, you see. So they're bringing in nectar, they splash it around the cell walls and they dry it out, slowly dewatering it to get that moisture content down below that 18% range, so the honey will keep forever once they've capped it, or keep forever in your jar on the shelf. So you want to harvest when it's capped. Now I'm setting up the shelf low down here because we've got a very tall jar, which is lovely. You need a very long spoon though, but it's a really nice way to view and see the colour of your honey is in tall jars. Okay, there it is there. And all we're going to do is grab our key. This is my father and I's invention. We worked for a decade on and brought it to the world in 2015. We're 9.5 years in now, and I'm still really enjoying the process of watching this honey flow. It's just a mesmerizing thing. You can see it coming down through the cells and coming out the tube here already. I'm turning that again. You can do it in segments to make it easier to turn. And we've got very light honey, which is typical for the springtime here. And I would say, and I hope it is now, the Goya or wild quince, which has a very, very aromatic flavour. Yep, there it is. It's an incredible, bright, blow your taste buds off flavour, and it's a beautiful thing to get so many different flavours from all of the flowering species in your area. So different flavours, different colours, and the bees will generally start centrally and keep filling up the hive as they move out, and that way you get this patchwork of colours and flavours from different frames. Then of course you go and harvest one, they'll fill it up with whatever's flowering now, which means you get this beautiful checkerboarding of flavours to take back to the table. And there's no processing you need to do beyond this. It's just flowing out beautifully into your jar and it's ready for the table, which is the dream really. It's my father and I's dream. We worked for a decade on, and it was such a win to have no filtering needed, no further processing needed. It's just pure fresh raw honey ready for the table. If you've got any questions, chime in. We're going to go and do a hive split. So we're going to take the top box off a hive, get down into the brood nest, have a look at what's going on, and if it's ready for it, we'll take a split by taking some of the frames out and putting them into a new box. So stay tuned in for that, and think of your questions, put it in the comments below. Look at that, beautiful. So we might just cover up that jar because we're going to wander off and we're opening a hive nearby as well. We don't want the bees to actually come looking for honey around the back of the hive. And sometimes you'll find them piling in the jar Right now there's a flow on, so they're unlikely, but still we're going to cover this up just by putting a bit of wax wrap on there. This is the kind you use if you want to make reusable lunch wrapping for your kids' sandwiches. You can also use any kind of kitchen wrap or just about anything at all to cover up whatever jar you have. But look at that gorgeous coloured light honey. I love this colour because we actually don't get much of it. It's just for several weeks in the spring, and then that's it. We're back to a lot of red tones and even really dark black tones, and these malty dark flavours come in. So it's great to just have such contrast, and it brings such a great story when you have people over when they're tasting the honey, which is a fun thing to do. It's a beautiful thing to be able to share honey with friends, family, neighbours. Okay, so we're just going to cover up this little jar here like this, just by pinching it around the back under the tube there, around like that. So any bees that decide they want to do some honey robbing will not be able to get into the jar. Okay, so we've got our smoker here, we've got our bee brush, we've got our Hive tool, everything we need in this little caddy here. We might leave the jar here, and we'll go and split this hive over here on the water tank. It's quite cool actually. We're making use of this little water tank area because the grass doesn't grow on it, so it's a great little spot. You don't have to mow under the hive, and it's a useful spot to keep a couple of beehives. So first of all, we're going to get the smoker going. If you've got some questions, chime in, don't be shy, and we'll get to answering those. I'm going to start by tipping out the ash from last time. If you find that builds up too much in there, it will actually clog it up a little bit and the smoker won't go as good. Next, we're going to get some pine needles that we've got in a drum here. People ask what you should use in a smoker. I say use whatever you've got around you. In this case, we've got pine trees here. You've got pine needles and leaves on the ground. Let's use those. They don't last as long as some of the other denser barks, but just means you've got to top it up a little more often. Tips for lighting a smoker. One of these is great, but you don't need it. You can just use a lighter. Don't put too much fuel in is the major tip, and then slowly add it while keeping the flames going, and don't burn yourself. If you're in a fire prone time, which we're not here, then you'll be lighting it on a surface so that any embers aren't going to go onto the ground and start a fire. But in this case, we're nice and wet here at the moment, so I won't worry about that. Okay, so this will speed things up a little bit, this blowtorch. You can see it's going nicely now, and what you want to see is flames. You see flames coming out the top. Now if I stuffed it full now, what would happen is it would go out. But if I just put a little bit in and keep adding slowly, let that catch on, that's probably the major tip. And I still do it, I still stuff it too quickly and put it out. If that happens, don't worry, just start over. But there it is. Now use your hive tool to press it down rather than burning yourself. Wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping. That'll help in two ways. Help eliminate stings to your hands, but also the smoker will eventually get hot. You learn that pretty quickly, and you don't touch it when it's hot, but wear gloves if you're new, because there's a lot of new things going on and you don't want to introduce any more trouble than you need to. Okay, there we go. That's smoking away nicely, and you can actually give your hands a little smoke, not when there's flames coming out, and that masks your own kind of mammal smell, because after all we are an intruder into the hive, and if we come in smelling like a bear, then they're more likely to get into attack mode. So masking your hands if you're going gloveless, that is, which as an experienced beekeeper I'm going to not wear my gloves, but if I notice they're a bit aggressive, I'll put my gloves on. I've always got them at the ready. Now it's going nicely. We can add a bit more to the smoker really stuff it full now, and that means it will last longer. Next we're going to blow a little bit of smoke into the entrance of the hive, and that will help the bees change mode from being in a more defensive mode into a calm mode. And it's believed the mechanisms are, one, it makes the bees think there's a fire and they decide to focus on that instead, gorging themselves with honey, ready to take off if need be. Look at the pollen coming in. Give us a thumbs up if you can see any pollen pants coming in, the bright orange balls on their back legs. It's a good sign when they're bringing in pollen. After all, pollen is their protein. That's what they make their bee bread with. It's the primary food for the young worker bees. So they need a lot of pollen. So it's good to see that coming in. Nice healthy hive. Now, also if we look in the side window, the reason why we've pegged this one for a split is simply because when we open the observation window, we can hardly see the comb face beneath, showing that overcrowding might lead to swarming because we're in the springtime. Look at that, we've got yellow pollen on this little bee here. So we've got orange pollen and some bright yellow, really light yellow there. Any questions coming in?
This is a great question actually, Seeds, from Yasmin. She's just wondering, is when you're doing the split, could you also guide people who have 2 brood boxes, sort of how they would do it, and how do they select the frames to do a split? So,
okay, great question.
Yeah.
So often people, especially in the colder areas, are adding a second brood box, and that will mean that you've got potentially brood spread between the 2 boxes. Typically you'll be more central with honey on the entrances. So in that case, you can perform a split without having to introduce another box. Now, it depends on the size of your colony, but you could decide to actually take one of the brood boxes onto another base, shuffle the brood between them, make sure they both have the resources to make a queen, and that's eggs down some cells, or you might be introducing a queen that you've purchased, in which case you'll be introducing it into the one that doesn't have a queen. So you'll be shuffling frames A and B and just making sure both hives have enough resources. I typically make one hive the weaker one without the queen and nurse it and keep the other hive strong for honey production. But it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Now, I'm going to blow some smoke into the hive. I'm also going to protect myself. After all, standing in front of the beehive entrance like this is a good way to get some stings, because this is where they're protecting their hive. So I'm going to put my bee suit on, making sure I'm doing the zip up in the middle. Then there's 2 zips either side that typically overlap, and then a Velcro over the top of that. And that's how we limit them getting in to our bee veil. In this case I've got the Clear View, which is an innovation we came out with a while back. Super useful for doing splits because it allows you to see better down the cells and look for those eggs, which is an important step if you're doing what's called a walkaway split, where you're letting them raise their own queens. So a good tip there. Okay, so I'm going to blow some smoke into the hive, get this smoker nicely going, and we're just going to add some smoke like that. I like to make sure it goes into the hive and then leave the smoker at the entrance for the returning foragers to get that whiff, that scent of smoke, which will help change their mode from being one of protection into either preparation for fire, or another theory is it masks the alarm pheromone, and that way when one bee sets off the alarm that there's an intruder, the others don't necessarily hear it or smell it in this case. Okay, so what you'll need to do a split is another setup like this, where you have your base. In this case it's our Flow Hive 2+ base with the pest management tray, and then we've got our brood box, we've got a full rack of brood frames, we've got our inner cover, and then our roof on top of that. So first of all, we're going to remove that inner cover, and we're going to remove this roof here, and somebody's put a little bit of comb up here, perhaps it had a bit of brood in it, not sure, and they've taken the plug out there. So that's why we're seeing bees straight away. If you had this plug in that hole, then the bees wouldn't be present under the roof. It can be a useful thing to, if you're in a hurry to make some space, you can take that plug out and all of a sudden there's a lot more space in the hive, which if you can't quite get there to do a split and it's spring and they're likely to swarm, it can help reduce congestion with a whole lot of bees moving up into the roof cavity. Another little tip there for the spring management. Okay, next we're going to take this box off. So we can choose to leave the inner cover on. Typically I would, but in this case we've got bees up here anyway, so I'm going to take it off, and that will expose the flow frames underneath. And if the box was too heavy, we could remove some of these flow frames. They're going to be 3 or 4 kilograms each, so removing some will drastically reduce the weight. Or get a friend to help you if you're finding it hard to lift. Okay. Next I'm going to get around and crack each corner with this hive tool. It's the J-Hive tool, the chisel end goes here. Now, sometimes the excluder wants to come with the super, sometimes not, so you've got to make a little choice there which one you're going to try for. In this case, it looks like the excluder wants to stay behind. Nice and stuck, so the bees have used their propolis, which they're collecting tree sap and making their glue, and they've really glued this on. Oh, under might be better. There we go. It's coming loose now. So we go around to each corner and do that. Sometimes when it hasn't been inspected for a while, they'll even glue the frames to the excluder, which can sometimes be a bit of an issue when you're taking the box off. Any questions as we do our hive split?
Yes, Cedar, we've got John's and Dubbo in New South Wales, and just facing the hive northeast, just wondering if that's the correct position or does he need to move it?
The facing it northeast typically comes from the commercial beekeeping, where you're after that morning sun to shine in the entrance, wake up your bees nice and early and get another hour of foraging time. For us as backyard beekeepers, it's not necessarily the highest priority. So if you can, sure, face it northeast here in the southern hemisphere, but if there's a better position in terms of the flight path, which is probably the main consideration if they're close by your house, is you want this flight path to be not where people and pets are usually walking. So that's probably the main consideration, is their flight path. You want several meters in front where they can get up and away without bothering anybody. And I'd go full sun over full shade, or in the ideal situation, you've got afternoon shade in the summertime. As to whether they're faced east or not, that doesn't matter so much. Okay, so taking this box off, I'm going to upend it onto this face here. I'm going to keep the frames in the same orientation so any new nectar doesn't spill out. These frames look all pretty capped, so I'm not too worried about that. But to get it off, I'm going to open this door here, and another tip is that creates a very nice handle. So I've got a handle on this side and a handle here, and let's see if we're free yet. We are. Okay, good. Now I'm going to keep the weight close to my body because it is quite heavy. There's probably 20 kilograms of honey in this box. So make sure you're looking after yourself and lifting accordingly, or getting some help if you need to, or as said, taking out some of the frames to lighten your load. So I'm going to leave it on that face there. That way no nectar will spill out. And that gives me access now to the brood nest here. Now we're looking in, we can see lots of bees, which is great. We can see all the frames are nicely drawn out. And now we're going to start pulling some frames out. One thing we missed was creating a frame rest, which can be useful to rest a couple of frames on as we go about our split. So to do that, I'm just going to use the little tool that comes with the kit for assembly. I'm going to choose to put a frame here and here. So you can choose a lower position or a higher position as you like. And the same shelf brackets that come for harvesting you can reuse here as a frame rest, which is there. You may need to adjust, making sure it's nice and tight like that. And once you've got a happy position for them, you can leave those screws there for next time. Okay, any more questions?
Yep, so there was a couple of questions coming in about robbing, and one was, are you worried about bees robbing with leaving the flow frames out like that and the colony open like that?
So generally you avoid forgetting and leaving a frame leaning against a tree. Is a good way to start robbing, and it happens sometimes if you're doing a lot of beekeeping. But this is the way we beekeep. We often got hives apart for an hour or so, and in that time I guess you could get some robbers coming, but by the time they've all got it together to come and rob, you're putting the hive back again. So the idea is to make sure you clean up any spilt honey, make sure you don't leave any frames or equipment with honey on them around for the rest of the day. You want to clean it all up when you're finished doing your brood inspection. So generally not worried about robbing, especially because we're in a nice nectar flow. So I'm adding a little smoke because I noticed a couple of warning hits of the bees crashing into my hands. So I need a little more smoke to stay calm. After all, it is a bit of a grey day. Best to do your beekeeping on a nice, warm, sunny day. Mid-morning to mid-afternoon is ideal. You can't always do that, so we do our best, and hopefully the bees will behave today.
Sita, just before when we were harvesting the honey, questions coming in. Do you ever take the roof off to check that the frames are capped? Because they've seen videos where the edges looked capped but the centre's not capped. So do you ever check it before harvesting honey?
Very rarely. The whole idea is that you can harvest honey without having to take the hive apart, and that works for the most part. And I'll show you why. As we let this hive respond to the smoke again, let's come and have a look at our jar of honey. So you can see it's already full, which is amazing. We've been over there going about other beekeeping business, and the jar's just filled up for us, which is an amazing amount of honey from a single flow frame. Look at that. Isn't that just beautiful? Gorgeous springtime light honey here. It's such a joy to be able to share in the spoils that the bees work so hard for. So looking at these frames, I can see that they're not all capped actually. So if you see it like this, where it's not capped all the way out to the edge, you go, well, chances are there's quite a lot of uncapped cells in this hive. But having a look in the side window, I noticed that the edge frame was capped. On the other side of the hive, however, it isn't. So that's why I chose that one, because I knew that those cells were likely to be mostly capped. And that's what you want. You want the cells full of honey, and ideally mostly capped. So you can see nectar down the cells, but it's not quite capped. But if you're not sure, a great piece of learning is to open the hive, pull out the frames, and just start measuring up what this looks like and what it looks like on the entire frame. And after a while, the frames will tell you a story and give you a good indication without having to take the hive apart of when it's time to harvest. But you only get that if you watch over time. So I know this is a filling pattern because all of these cells are almost full, but they're all at the same level. Whereas when they're hungry, what you get is full cell, completely empty, full cell, completely empty, this patchwork happening. And if you're seeing that, you know they're typically going to eat some honey right above the brood nest in the middle. So in that case, if you still wanted some honey, good idea to harvest the edge ones if they're looking nice and capped, and leave that central bit above the brood nest for the bees. And when you see them filling again like this, that beautiful filling pattern, after a week or so, then you can be pretty sure they've filled in that area above the brood nest. But as said, if you want to really gauge what this looks like as to what's going on inside, pop some frames out, have a look. But generally, once you get the hang of it, you rarely have to do that, and you can harvest in this easy way while the bees are just going about their business. Okay, back to our hive split, and it looks like we've got plenty of bees, which is great. So the aim of the game is to end up with 2 colonies. And the way we're going to do that is take some of the frames out of this hive and put it into this hive here. And if we make sure they have the resources to raise a queen, then the hive without the queen will raise one. And that means eggs, which look like a tiny little grain of rice down the cells. The bees will notice they're queenless, or the hive without the queen will notice they don't have one. Now typically set about making one of those cells into a queen cell, or perhaps more than one. And then you're away with a peanut looking cell hanging down, hopefully with a queen inside it. And when she emerges into the hive, she then will go on her mating flight, and you have another colony with a laying queen. So that's the aim of the game. We're going to show you how to do that. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to work. Good time to top up the smoker if you've been yabbering away, and the smoker is starting to go out. Okay. Wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping. Watch out, the smoker could be hot. Okay. So I'm going to blow a little smoke because there's so many bees here I can't actually work, but you watch, if I use a little smoke they'll clear out of the way, which means I'm less likely to squash bees and I can get the frames out. So smoke's a great tool, and although it's probably not nice to get smoke blown in your face, it certainly helps in being able to work without squashing lots of bees. Okay, now I'm going to choose a frame to actually pull out and have a look at. So I'm looking down between them. These are all naturally drawn frames, there's no foundation or anything. I'm looking down to see which one's a good one to start with. So it looks like just about any of them are pretty easy to pull up. I'll just start with a central one here. Sometimes with foundationless frames you can get some wandering comb that makes it hard to pull out a frame. So you want to go sideways first, but the first frame you can't actually go sideways, so you choose one that's looking nice and straight with gaps between them. Now, little tip, you're going sideways first like this, just to break the propolis connecting these end bars here. And once you've done that, you can then use the J end of the tool to pull up that frame. So it levers on the next frame along. Once you've got it like that, wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping, and same at the other end. You've got to get it under like that. And the first one, a great tip, is to just go really slowly because there's not a whole lot of room and you don't want to roll bees as you go. if you roll bees between comb surfaces, you might squash a whole lot of bees, which we want to avoid doing. But once we've got this first frame out, it'll be much easier to move about the hive because we can move the frame sideways first. Okay, let's have a look and see what we've got on this frame. Got a bit of brood, which is great. So that's worker brood I'm looking at. And what have we got on this side? You've got worker brood in this section. That's this area here. That's what you want to see, lots of nice worker brood. Then you've got patchy brood over here that is probably going through a stage where they've got larvae. Actually, it's pollen. So it's pollen and worker brood. And what have we got here? We've got a queen cup. Queen cup, it's not capped, it's usually a bit bigger if it's a capped queen cell. But if we do find a queen cell, then that'd be a great one to put into our new split. So I've just got a few drops of rain, which isn't ideal beekeeping. Hopefully the bees will behave and we'll be able to continue with our split. So I'm seeing young larvae down these cells. Give us a thumbs up if you can see the white down the cells. It's the larvae or grubs, and they're going through their caterpillar phase, if you like, before they spin a silk cocoon around themselves, go through their metamorphosis and emerge into the hive as a fluffy little baby bee ready to do the chores of the hive, which there are many in the short little life of a bee. What have we got over here? We've got another queen cup. What I'm interested in is whether there is a larvae down inside it, because that would be a win for doing a hive split. Now it's a little bit hard, you need to tilt it towards the light. Having a clear view veil will help a lot. And I can't see a larvae down there, so it's just a queen cup. But we got the rain.
It wasn't on the weather forecast.
It wasn't on the weather forecast, no.
Crikey.
So that's going to be interesting for the bees. If it stays around, we might have to pack up shop, but let's just see how we go and see whether we can get this hive split going before the bees get very grumpy about the situation. So we're looking for some frames with some eggs down the cells. There was a young larvae, but hey, do I get an umbrella too? Thanks. Thanks, Sophie. No, it's all right. Well, we'll see if it's all right, depending on how the bees go. They do not like rain. Okay, we've got a lot of brood there. We've got pollen. We have a lot more brood on this side, which is fantastic. Have we got any eggs down the cells? We've got some very young larvae. I'm looking for eggs. I'm not quite seeing eggs. They're just a few days old already. Just a few days old already here. Not so good. Rainy beekeeping. A lot of brood on this frame here. So we're relieving congestion. It's the springtime here, and also taking a hive split. You've got drones in this area, but a lot of beautiful brood. It's amazing when you get it clockwork like that across the frame. That's an ideal laying pattern where they're filling most of the cells with brood. And on the other side, a lot of brood too, and we've got drones as well. So that might be a good one to give to the new colony just to boost its numbers, because every one of those little frames is going to become a new little baby bee emerging into the hive. So that one we're going to give to our new colony. having a quick look, I'd rather leave the queen behind. Don't want to leave the queen. I'd rather leave the queen with the parent colony so it can prosper, keep producing its good honey, and we'll nurse this new one along and let it raise its queen. But you can go either way. You can do an even split and just take half the frames out. You don't even need to find the queen for that if you're letting them raise their own. Okay, rainy split. It's really coming down now. We're going to hurry up and finish this job so we can close the hive back up. They're surprisingly looking after us here. I'm going to use my body to shelter some of the frames here, and I'm just going to take 3 frames out and leave the rest for this hive. So here we go. What do we got here? Got a lot more drones, and I'm looking to see if the queen's on here. Shout out Callum if you see it. Often Callum sees the queen before I can. Here we go. Any more questions coming through?
Yes, Seed. If it's really hot, like over 100, do you recommend a little shade for your hive?
If you can give them shade, then great, but otherwise bees are amazing little air conditioners, and they will collect water and do evaporative cooling, so having a water source is a great tip if they're very hot, and they'll do a great job of keeping the colony at a great temperature in order for the bees to raise their young. So they'll air condition the hive and keep it down around our body temperature to make sure the brood survives. I'm going to need windscreen wipers on this clear view. Can we get that happening?
We'll get the R&D team onto it, putting in a wiper, a wiper blade.
Okay, so let's answer a couple more questions as I do this rainy day split. Don't do what I do, people. Close your hive back up again if it's starting to rain, especially if you're in a cold area. We're nice and warm here, so I'm not too worried. I'll just hurry up about my business here. Got a lot of pollen, got a lot of brood here. What I'm looking for is some eggs down the cells so that they can raise a queen from that. And looking around for the queen, can't see her, and I'm probably not going to bother trying to find her in the rain. I'm going to choose this frame here, which had some very young larvae on it, and with any luck, if they're in the first couple of days of their life, they'll be able to raise a queen from that. So we're looking for some eggs down the cells. That'll do for our split. I wouldn't mind shaking some more bees in there, but one easy way to get more bees in there is actually to switch the hive positions. So we're going to do that. I'm going to pick up this hive while it's still light without all of the with the big box on top with all of the honey, and I'll switch positions. Now when you're doing a split, I recommend putting the weak colonies frames just together in the middle. Make sure you put all of the brood frames in and press them together with the space on either side. Now understandably the bees are getting annoyed about beekeeping in the rain, especially doing a split, so I'm going to put my gloves on, and that way I won't get any more stings on the hands. Okay. Always good to have your gloves handy, and if you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves, and that way you will get less stings. Any more questions?
Yes, Seeds. Just wondering, do you need a lot of space to have a beehive, or can you just have one in your backyard?
One of the beautiful things about beekeeping is it takes up very little space, especially with the flow hive, because you no longer need the extraction shed with the spinner and the decapping bench and the buckets and the sieves and the hot knife and all of the paraphernalia that goes along in order to get to a beautiful thing we call honey at the end. You can just harvest honey like you saw down here, straight from the hive by turning a key, and the only space it takes up is this amount of space, which means it's a very popular form of agriculture because you can produce real produce from a very small footprint, even on a rooftop in a city or on a balcony, which is very exciting. And that's why, one of the reasons why beekeeping is so popular. So as I said, squash the frames together. That's a major tip, because bees are sensitive to the bee space. Put any excess space on either side. Now, with the parent split, I'm going to take the opportunity to add in these spare frames and checkerboard them a little bit, because I'm trying to relieve the primary swarming trigger. And it's a great idea to cycle frames out towards the edges and put fresh ones back towards the middle. So that one goes in, but let's put one in between it, like that. Any more questions?
Yes, Cedar. Kirsty's wondering, what should you do if your queen has ended up in the super and has started laying eggs in the super frames?
Okay, occasionally that can happen where when she's small, she squeezes up through the excluder before she's fully grown. And in that case, what you'll need to do is put her back down. And one of the easy ways to do that, if you can't find her, is just shake all of the bees off the frames in the top, down into the bottom box, put your excluder back in place, top box back on, all of the foraging bees will come up and continue their work, but your queen will now be down where you need her, laying her eggs in the brood box. We do have a live stream somewhere showing you exactly that. We did find an opportunity to show you, so have a look at that one. We'll put a link in the comments below and we'll take you through exactly how to go about it. But it's relatively straightforward. You're simply shifting the bees. One more frame to go. I might put it in between these two, so we're kind of checkerboarding the frames, and that way they'll do a better job of making nice straight frames, because they've already got a guide next to it, and we won't have to worry about checking like you do when you dump a swarm straight into a foundationless set of frames. Any more questions?
Yes, Cedar Sprite, and he's there in Sydney, and just added 2 empty foundationless frames to the edge of their hive, and just noticed there's a lot of drone brood in them. Wondering, would that be a sign of swarming?
It's typical in the springtime for hives to want to spread their genetics around, which means they'll be raising a lot of drones, like we saw in one of the frames earlier. And the idea is that then that genetics will fly off and spread itself by, fingers crossed, mating with a queen in a drone congregation area. And then the drones will return at the end of the day, or the unlucky ones. The ones that actually get to mate will have their genitals ripped off and fall to their death. And the ones that were unlucky will fly back to the hive, and better luck next time. So it's a bit of a brutal mating ritual, but it is normal, especially in the springtime, to see a lot more drones in your hive. If you're seeing only drones and no brood, it may mean that your queen is failing and she's running out of sperm, or it may mean that there's no queen at all and workers are laying eggs, in which case those eggs are unfertilized and they'll turn into drones or male bees. So as long as you've got worker brood, you're all good. You can leave the drones there. Okay, unless you're using them for varroa management, that is. Okay, so next we're going to put the hive back together just by moving the frames in, making sure the excess space is on either side again, and that way we're respecting the bee space and we'll get less cross comb between frames. So bees like about 9mm working space if they're working back to back, and that way they won't feel the need to make comb between frames, which will be helpful for us because what we're trying to do is maintain a manageable hive where the bees can make their comb inside each frame so we can pull them out easily, do our hive splits, inspect for pests and disease, and do our routine brood inspections. Okay, so that's the hive split. We've successfully taken 3 frames out of here and we've put it in that box there. We've replaced 3 blank ones. They're foundationless, they have the comb guide in the top. The bees will do a great job of drawing their comb on those, and that'll be a whole lot of new real estate for the queen to lay, and that will limit the primary swarming trigger of overcrowding. Okay, I might grab the bee brush and just brush in the remaining bees, use a bit of smoke, and put our queen excluder back on along with the heavy box of honey that we should do some harvesting from. Springtime's an exciting time, lots of honey coming in, lots of hive splits, making new colonies. It's the most exciting time for a beekeeper. Any more questions as we put this
Cedar,
hive
do you
back
ever
together?
do a double deep, wondering about do we ever do that in Australia, or is the best set up a single brood box?
So I like to go single, it's just easier. You don't have to look through 2 boxes in order to find the queen and do your brood inspections. I find there is enough room in a single brood box for the colony to be happy and healthy and have enough cells. If you count all the cells, there's definitely enough for the queen to keep laying. However, in colder areas, they do like to add another brood box, typically to have a bigger size colony with more stores in it, and honey on the edges in both of those boxes will help that colony survive a long cold winter with no flowers. So I like to go single brood box, but you can go double. You can do 2 supers, or you can do 2 brood boxes if you want to run a bigger hive, and that's one way to reduce the chances of your hive swarming. Okay, just going to see if we can clear some of these bees away, because we're going to put this box back on the hive. We don't want these bees around the edges to get squashed. Okay, now we're going to seize the opportunity to put this back on, bearing in mind it's heavy. Make sure you lift, look after your back. Lots of beekeepers don't, and you could take some frames out if you want it to be lighter, or get a help from a friend to lift that box back on. Now we're just lining up the hive with the box underneath it, and our split is done. I'm going to put this roof back on. We don't really need the extra space up here in the roof cavity. I might clean this up and put that plug back in. If you want to get bees off something, a short, sharp shake is the way to go. And using the chisel end, you can chisel off that wax if it's got honey in it. Don't leave it out or you'll promote robbing. Looks pretty dry to me. You can clean that off, the inner cover. Little tip, when you put the inner cover back on, you can put it on an angle and slide any bees out of the way as you put it back together. Any more questions?
Yeah, Cedar, when's the latest time in Australia that you could do a split in?
In Australia?
Australia, mate.
To do a split.
Split in Australia.
Like many things in beekeeping, it depends on your exact location. Here where we are, you could just about split any time of year when you had lots of bees in your box. In fact, we've been splitting in winter sometimes because the flowers come early and the bees are booming and it's time to do your splits. Now, if you're inland, even 2 hours drive from here, you're probably not doing any splits in winter. You're doing them in the spring and summertime. Now, if you're further down south, you're definitely not doing your splits in the winter because it's cold and the bees are bunkering down for a long cold winter and waiting for the flowers to come. So it really depends where you are, but having a look at your bees, getting some local advice on the seasonality, and watching for when you see the hive is getting a little overcrowded. If you're looking in the windows and you can hardly see the comb, good idea to get ahead of the curve, take your split before they split themselves in the form of a swarm. Okay, we can then close these poor bees up. Fancy doing a split in the rain. That's just mean. But there you go, what we do for the camera. I normally choose a nice, warm, sunny day, mid-morning to mid-afternoon, to do your hive splits, to do your brood inspections. Especially in the colder areas, you don't want your bees to suffer from cold shock, which can happen to the young larvae before they've gone into the cocoon phase. So in that first 11 days, the worker brood can get a cold shock and die if it gets too cold. That's why the bees keep the brood nest at about body temperature. But if you're there in, say, 15 degrees C or colder, and you've left a frame of brood out and you've got uncapped larvae, that brood could die. Here we are in our warm springtime. It's nice and steamy. I'm not worried about these bees getting a few drops of rain as we're doing our hive split. But as said, choose a nice sunny day when you perform your split. One more roof to go on and we can then get out of the rain. Thank you very much for all of your great questions. If you've got answers to people's questions, chime in. It's wonderful to see a community of people all around the world answering away all of the questions that people ask. It's up to us as more experienced beekeepers to help the new beekeepers, and it's just wonderful to see that happening on a global scale. Thank you very much for all your great questions. We're going to get out of the rain. See you again same time next week, and let us know what you'd like us to cover, and we'll be back with another show and tell. There's one more thing to do, and that's to switch these two hives positions. So this little weaker one will get some returning foragers and the numbers